Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, November 11th, 2024, and today we are going to talk about a potentially new way to potato. We'll talk about a composting conundrum, and then it's Messy Monday. So let's do it. Well, I hope everyone had a good weekend, which portmanteaus into geekend, which I think is appropriate. I did not have to coach soccer, but I watched a lot of soccer. I even reffed some soccer. I got my referee certification last year to improve my skills as a coach, and it's come in handy helping our league when we need an extra ref. And I just donate the money to our league, but maybe people don't know this, but refs make great money right now. If you ever need a good side gig where you help kids and get yelled at by adults, reffing is the best. In all seriousness, though, there is a ref shortage in the U.S., amazingly, because of the way that parents and coaches treat refs. So please be kind to them. But also, that means refs get paid very well, upwards of $30 to $40 an hour for rec leagues, and often more for club games. As a side gig, it's pretty fun. It's in high demand, and you get good exercise because you have to run up and down the field staying with the kids. If you have a 13-year-old who needs something to do and vaguely likes soccer, for many areas, that's old enough to become a referee as a first job. Again, I like youth sports for many reasons, but not least of which is that it gives me an opportunity I don't get through farming always, which is to interact with more of my local community. And if you ref, you could get paid for it. If I was young and hustling to find farm startup capital, and I liked soccer or whatever sport, I assume the shortage is across the board, reffing would be a tempting side gig for sure. In the early years when we were just starting out, Hannah and I bartended, which was brutal, good pay, but the late nights were tough to work until 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. some weeks, and then have to wind down, get to sleep, and then get up and farm. So that lasted for a while, but it was really tough. Then later on, I wrote some journalism, which was significantly lower paying, but I could do it from home early in the morning before the sun came up. So that worked out well for our schedule. For sure, we greatly underestimated, i.e. didn't really estimate at all, what it would cost to start a farm, but startup capital is for another show. Today, we're talking potatoes. Okay, so I was going to save this for later in the winter, but then I realized there are Southern Hemisphere growers who can start trialing this now and get back to us before the spring starts on how it goes for them. What I'm really talking about is a potentially new way to grow potatoes. Last winter, I was researching for a video I did on growing great potatoes, which I will link in the show notes. We've had a lot of success growing healthy potatoes over the last 4 years with good yields and without potato beetles. And I wanted to share our methods, but as I was reading the literature, I came across this method that researchers were using because, again, all of the best growing info is often buried in the scientific literature, where they were growing out the shoots, the plants on the potato, similar to how we grow out the plants for sweet potatoes, which we call slips. Basically, you just let the potato sprout. Like with sweet potato slips, we bury them under compost or soil mix and we let the potatoes sprout, and then we cut those off and then we plant them. That we had not done for potatoes. Now, I want to say from the outset that our results were mixed, and I don't want anyone listening to completely abandon their old system for potatoes in favor of this. Can we all agree that we are not going to do that? Awesome. Great. Now, there is something here, though. So hopefully, through a lot of little trials and sharing our results, we can figure out how to make it work, because it could be a potato game changer. But right now, that's also just theory. So effectively, here's how it works. Instead of using chunks of seed potatoes to grow out potato plants like you normally would, researchers were seeing positive results using potato sprouts without the spud attached. Of course, you've probably heard of chitting potatoes, which is when you purposely grow stubby sprouts on the seed potatoes, but then you plant that whole chunk with the sprout attached. This is sort of like that, but you take the plant off of the actual potato instead of planting the potato chunk. In this method I'm describing, you start potatoes in a tray with some potting soil to encourage roots, literally lay them in a tray, cover them with soil mix, allow them to sprout in a greenhouse or near a window or something, which folks watching on YouTube can see what that looks like. Then you cut the potato plants off of the tray just below the soil surface where you can see some roots when you're ready to plant them. By not using the spud or any of the tissue from the potato itself, you are greatly reducing your risk of disease transfer, which could mean that you can more easily save your own potato seed. Then the tray continues to grow, and I found I could have had at least 3 different plantings off each tray, theoretically tripling the yield per potato. Of course, that's all well and good, but if the potatoes don't potato, then what's the point? So, as for the results of my trial, they were positive but not profound. Overall, the potatoes from sprouts were smaller in size, but with basically 0 disease. Compared to the cuttings, where I did see some disease on the harvest, they were also more marketable, the ones from the sprouts. That is to say, just better looking. The potatoes from the sprouts were not necessarily faster into production, but I have some theories as to what complicated this particular trial, mostly revolving around a late freeze and the most intense early summer drought that I can remember farming in. It basically just stopped raining in May and then just started again like yesterday. But the late freeze wiped out a lot of the new plants and many didn't recover, so I had to replace them, which is something to keep in mind. I don't believe you can plant the plants as early as you can plant like potato chunks deep in the soil. My theory is that without the spud to use the energy, it was harder for them to regenerate. So in short, using the sprouts will grow potatoes, and you can sprout the potatoes again and again, earning multiple successions. But whether it's a better method yield-wise, this preliminary trial did not prove that, while also at the same time, it did not rule it out. If you get more plants, obviously you get better yield from the seed, but if the potatoes are smaller, it equates to lower yield per plant. Does that make sense? Now, because I saw some positive results here, I plan to try a more advanced version of this trial next year in the spring, comparing more varieties, because the results were 100% encouraging enough to think this could work in the right conditions or with the right execution. To me, this could be a path to making potatoes profitable, because you can buy a fifth or less of the amount of seed potatoes and also get multiple successions from each one. You could also buy those fancy heirloom ones that we all avoid because they make absolutely no financial sense, and grow them out either to have seed potatoes or potentially quadruple the number of plants or more than if you were just cutting them up and planting the actual potato. But the yields have to be comparable. So what I'm changing next year is burying them a bit deeper, where only the very tip of the plant is exposed to reduce greening on the potatoes themselves, which I did see a little bit of that. Mulch would have helped as well, since it was so dry this summer. And again, that would also help with the greening. One challenge is landing the timing after the last chance of frost, or covering the potatoes with row cover. So I will plant some early and cover them with row cover, and then plant some later as well to kind of just avoid that frost. But to put the potential into context, the trial I did with russets was 10 pounds, divided evenly between chitting, chunks, and slips. The chitting and the chunks planted about 20 feet total together. The remaining 3.3 pounds that I used for slips planted about 80 feet in the first planting. And then that same tray continued to sprout, so I could have meant like multiple more plantings. In other words, it was 4 times the amount of plants for the same amount of potatoes. The difference in plants alone is wild. So if you could get the yield up to being comparable, that is an enormous cost savings. And you could potentially get a round of radishes or something out of those beds before even planting those potatoes. So you could double the income, theoretically. So you wouldn't have to plant potatoes and then wait for those to sprout and then deal with all that. You could plant those potatoes right after you pull out a round of radishes or something, which would be amazing in terms of profitability. Otherwise, that's the gist of it so far. Let me know what questions you all have about this idea, and I look forward to exploring it more and more intensively this spring. Also, if anyone does a small side-by-side, especially you down in the Southern Hemisphere, or if you did one this year, let us know how it went or how it goes. Anyway, with that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back compostingly. That's probably a word. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right. Back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and want to support it, you can at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. The growth there at Patreon has been amazing. So if you do indeed value this show every day and the intense amount of work required to produce it, please consider supporting it. That would be awesome. Today's question comes from Patreon member Stuck in the Mud Farm, who writes, quote, I have a composting question. They say, my composting system. I put 15 yards of wood chips in my chicken run every spring and fall. During the summer, I take all of my garden waste and add it to the pile. The chickens dig, eat, and add their manure. I flip it regularly in the run. In the fall or spring, I pull it out and replace it. Once it's pulled out, I pile it up and let it finish composting for another 6 months. Flipping it for the first couple of weeks, I can get 131 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 55 degrees Celsius, or better for the first 3 or 4 turns, but never 5. If I add green material when pulling it out, I can get the temperature. That would reduce the amount I would have to give the chickens and the other pile. What is more valuable, the extra heat in the finishing compost or the chicken manure? I only have 50 chickens. After 6 months out of the run, I sift it and use it as a surface mulch. This and cover crops are my only sources of fertility. I am not certified organic. Thanks, end quote. Great question, Stuck in the Mud, and that's very cool that that's all the fertility that you need. I appreciate this and your support. So basically, this question boils down to, if I don't have to reach the requisite temperatures to meet organic standards, but still meet those temps through 3 turns, is that okay? So yes, absolutely, but also maybe not. What I mean is that obviously the compost will likely be fine, but if you are selling over $25,000 in produce, you still have to follow the Food Safety Modernization Act, also called FSMA guidelines. Now, there are some other exemptions, but if you don't sell more than $25,000 per year in veg, you are good. However, if you do, you may still be exempt. And I will post a link about all those exemptions and qualified exemptions in the show notes because it's more than would be interesting for me to just sit here and read. But let's assume you are not exempt. Then yes, you would still technically need to record those temperatures between 131 degrees Fahrenheit and 170 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 days with 5 turns. Otherwise, you can use it as manure, but not as compost. And yes, that's weird and confusing. The difference between compost and manure in the eyes of the government is that manure is anything that contains manure but has not met the composting guidelines. So indeed, even that 10-year-old pile of horse manure behind your barn is not technically compost to the regulators. And in order to use manure, it must be on the ground no fewer than 90 days before harvesting something that does not touch the soil, such as tomatoes, and 120 days before something that does touch the soil, such as lettuce or potatoes. That's called the 90-120 day rule, and it exists in both FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and organic certification. And no, it does not entirely make sense, but them's the rules. So all of that to say, yes, a little more green matter would help keep it warm, as you suggested, for longer, but you can decide if it matters based on your relationship to FSMA or organic certification. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. We're going to take one more break and then talk about a potato trial that did not go so well. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. All right, because this episode started with potatoes, why not end it with potatoes? I do think I have told this story somewhere on the channel at some point, maybe in the potato video that I posted, but it's worth a retelling because of how poorly it went. Basically, quite a few years ago, I had access to really rough, rotten hay. I also had a plot of ground that had been tarped for a long time, so it was basically just empty dirt. And I thought, why not just lay some potatoes down, cover them with hay, and see how it goes? I know people do this with straw sometimes. If this worked, it would be so much easier and lighter on the soil than other ways to plant potatoes. Also, I imagined a harvest of just brushing the hay aside to find loads of healthy potatoes. Well, that's not exactly how it went. I laid the potatoes down, covered them with the rotten hay, then walked away. Of course, a few weeks later, sprouts indeed poked through the mulch, but I don't think I have ever seen potato beetles so incredibly excited. I mean, I could practically hear the cheers erupt from the soil, tiny, tiny cheers. Lots of fun chants, very organized, jovial, well done. The potatoes were rapidly chowed down to the mulch, though, and the ones that survived limped heavily to the finish line. What I suspect happened is that the potatoes need a lot of nitrogen at the start, and they just didn't have access to it in this particular situation. If I'd set them in or covered them with a good compost, I suspect they would have done better. Except I also did this exact same thing with compost mulch 1 year to pretty much the same results. They did slightly better, but the greening was worse with the compost mulch than it was with the hay, and the potato beetles had to work slightly harder, but not that hard. Otherwise, still not an effective means of production in my context. Now, I'm not saying it will or won't work for you. Again, farming is highly contextual, but that was my experience with both hay and a layer of mulching compost over top of potatoes by just laying them on the soil surface and then covering them. Again, a small furrow in the soil, then covering the potato pieces with a nice compost enriched with a Jadam microorganism solution, or JMS, has yielded the absolute best results in my context year after year. I will dig more into that solution another day, but for the moment, I would watch the potato video I did if you want more info on how we generally do our potatoes the non-slip way successfully. That'll be linked in the show notes. Last thing I wanted to mention was that last Friday I said that you cannot call yourself organic if you're not certified. As a few listeners pointed out, that is not strictly true, but it still kind of is. There is an exemption to that rule, meaning you can call yourself your produce organic if you sell less than $5,000 of product per year. But you still are required to follow all of the organic guidelines in this exemption. So basically, you just don't have to go through the application process and fee and inspection. You still can only use approved products. You still have to keep track of all the records, and you cannot use the USDA organic seal on the product, and you cannot represent the product as certified organic. So all that to say, if you are not, just like not using chemicals and you're calling yourself organic because you don't sell more than $5,000 a year, that's not meeting the exemption. In terms of regulating this, quote, certifying agents have the authority to verify whether agricultural products marketed as organic are truly organic. Certifying agents may contact a farm to verify that the farm is meeting the exemption requirements and is complying with the organic standards, end quote. So in other words, there is a path to calling yourself organic without being certified if you're selling less than $5,000 a year of product, but you still have to do all of the requisite record keeping or risk getting in trouble. Anyway, I'm going to end it there for the day. Thank you to everyone who has been listening and engaging and subscribing and following, and absolutely especially those who have signed up to be a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-till growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to coffee. All right. Today we have James Allen, Les Button, Ton Rhodey, and Rochelle Bell. Rochelle Bell. These are great names. This has got kind of like a post-apocalyptic thing going on, but like a fun way. Like maybe this novel, I imagine, is like there was an apocalypse, things sucked for a while, but then they kind of got fun, and like Ton Rhodey and Rochelle Bell and Les Button and James Allen they just figured it out, had a blast, and I think it went fine really until like the aliens attacked, and then it was like a mess. But we're thankful that they survived. Yeah. Thank you to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. Have a great Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.